My mother left me at the airport when I was just 15. No warning, no goodbye, just a shrug, and you can figure it out before she walked off with her new husband and his perfect kids to catch a first-class flight. I stood there with 2 crumpled bills in my hand, watching her disappear into security like I was nothing more than a misplaced backpack. But I did figure it out. I called the father she'd spent years convincing me didn't want me. 3 hours later, a private jet cut through the night sky and landed for one person, me. And when she came back from her luxury vacation, she found my room empty, my key on the bed, and an illegal notice waiting for her. That was the day she realized the child she abandoned wasn't waiting for her anymore. My name is Orion Vale, and this is the truth I've carried for half my life. Before I share my story, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far my story can reach. Sometimes even a small connection can make a heavy memory feel a little lighter. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my story speaks to you, feel free to subscribe. It helps this little corner of the internet grow a place where stories like mine can finally be heard. My mother abandoned me at the airport when I was 15. People think moments like that are the beginning of a tragedy. But for me, it wasn't the start. It was the final snap of a long crack I'd spent years pretending not to see. My name is Orion Vale. I'm 30 now, working in family and juvenile law in Seattle, and most days I help kids escape the same kinds of emotional traps I grew up in. Tonight I'm sitting in my apartment long after midnight, the city lights bleeding in through the blinds, finally ready to tell the truth I've avoided for 15 years. The truth that began with my mother shoving $150 into my hand at Terminal C and saying, "You can figure it out." But that night wasn't where things began to fall apart. It was simply where the lie could no longer hold. I grew up in a tiny rental house in El Paso, Texas, cracked paint, an ancient stove, a leaky faucet that sang every night, but it was filled with warmth. My father, Lysander Vale, worked at an electronics repair shop. He taught me how to open old radios, how to fix loose wiring, how to build a computer out of mismatched parts. On weekends, he'd drive us out to an empty stretch of land, spread out a blanket, and point out the constellations. "That one's Orion," he'd say. "It's your name for a reason. Kid stars don't get lost. They guide." My mother, Maribel, worked double shifts, serving tables during the day, cleaning offices at night. She was exhausted most of the time, but she always tried. She baked me uneven birthday cakes, hung homemade streamers, and told me to be practical because money is security. Even then, I believed I had both my parents. It felt certain. It felt unshakable. But when I was 9, everything shifted. My parents fought more. Conversations turned into silence. The house felt like it was holding its breath. One afternoon, they sat me down on the couch, my father at one end, my mother at the other, and told me they were separating. I heard fragments like stability, money, responsibility, but none of it mattered, except the fact that we wouldn't be a family under one roof anymore. At first, Dad visited every weekend, then every few weeks. Then the calls came instead, short, awkward, full of pauses. And every time I asked about him, my mother told the same story. He wasn't paying enough, he was starting a new life. He said I'd understand someday. I was a kid. I trusted her. I trusted the version of him she put in my head. But the first sign that something was off came quietly. One afternoon I saw an envelope with my name on it in her drawer, handwriting unmistakably like Dad's. Before I could pick it up, she slammed the drawer shut and told me it was advertising mail. She locked it in her bedroom. I didn't argue, but something inside me pulled tight. A feeling I couldn't name, yet only that something important was being kept from me. After the divorce, she insisted we leave El Paso. She said the city had nothing to offer. Overnight, everything tied to my father, our stargazing field, the repair shop, our neighborhood, was left behind. And with every new mile, she repeated a single mantra: he didn't call, he didn't send money, he didn't care. Eventually, even my memories started bending toward her version. Sitting here at 30, I finally understand the first person who walked away wasn't my father. And the night at Terminal C wasn't an accident of cruelty. It was the final chapter of a story that had been quietly rewriting itself long before I noticed. What came next was the chapter where my mother stepped into a world I was never meant to belong to. and where I started disappearing from her life long before she ever left me at that airport. When we moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, I thought it was just another restart. My mother took a server job at a Southwestern-style restaurant, tourists, artists, wealthy real estate guys. One evening, a group of high-end clients came in. Among them was Victor Hale's sharp suit, confident smile, the kind of man who filled the room without trying. He left a huge tip and a note, "Hope I get your table again next time." My mother took the receipt home like it was a souvenir. Her eyes had a shine I hadn't seen since I was little. Things escalated fast. Victor started requesting her section every time he dined there. He invited her for coffee after shifts. At first she told him no because she had a son at home, but soon enough she was asking a neighbor to look after me so she could go. Her clothes changed, new heels, bold lipstick, hair curled. She said she was finally taking care of herself. The day she introduced me to Victor, he was polite enough, asked about school, but it was clear who he wanted to be talking to. I felt something shift inside me, something quiet but certain I wasn't the center of her world anymore. Within months he proposed. The ring was huge, absurdly huge, and my mother cried like her whole life had finally aligned. We moved into Victor's glass mansion on a hill overlooking Santa Fe. It had a home theater, a gym, an infinity pool facing the red desert. I was placed in the smallest room at the far end of the hallway, tucked away behind a laundry closet. It didn't feel like an accident. Then came meeting his 3 kids, Aurelia, Fox, and Juno. Aurelia looked me up and down like I'd walked in wearing the wrong invitation. Fox gave a nod and disappeared under his headphones. Juno smiled politely, but her eyes slid away the moment Mom wasn't looking. Later, I overheard Aurelia on the phone saying, "His mom's great, but her kid total baggage. Doesn't fit this house at all." My mother heard it too. She didn't defend me. She didn't say a word. Family dinners were the worst: long tables, expensive wine, conversations about galleries, investments, skiing trips, and charity galas. My mother adjusted quickly, speaking their language as if she'd been preparing for this her whole life. I'd try to share something about school or a science project, but my words would float into the air and dissolve. Minutes later, they were back to talking about Aurelia's art show or Fox's lacrosse schedule. It felt like being erased in real time. Worse, my mother began rewriting her past, our past. She called our years in El Paso the struggle years, told Victor's friends she had no real family support back then, and dismissed my father entirely as someone not worth mentioning. Something cracked inside me every time she said it. Then came the moment that shook loose the first real doubt. I was using her office computer to print a homework assignment when I saw a tab open a business article about a tech company in Seattle. The CEO was Lysander Vale, my father, standing in a glass conference room wearing a suit looking nothing like the broke, unreliable failure she'd described. Before I could read more, she appeared behind me, slammed the tab shut, and changed the computer password. That image, his name beneath his picture, burned into me. That was when my questions started. And right when those questions grew loudest, Victor announced a new family vacation. Bermuda. 2 weeks. He made reservations. Everyone was excited. Everyone except me. Because by then I could already feel it coming, that final brutal cut. The one that would leave me standing alone at Terminal C with $150 in my hand and a mother walking away like I was never part of her story to begin with. The first sign should have been how my name never came up at dinner. Victor sat at the head of the table that night, swirling his wine like some patriarch from a glossy magazine spread announcing he wanted to take the whole family to the Maldives for 2 weeks. Aurelia gasped, Fox actually took off his headphones, and Juno almost knocked over her glass from excitement. My mother put a hand on Victor's arm like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. I waited for her to glance my way, even just to include me with a nod. Nothing. Only when I finally asked, "What about me?" did she throw out a distracted, "Of course you're coming, don't make it weird," before turning back to Victor as if the conversation had ended. I tried to hold on to hope, telling myself maybe she was flustered, maybe she hadn't realized she overlooked me. But everything that followed proved otherwise. When she took Aurelia, Fox, and Juno shopping for new swimsuits, sandals, and monogrammed luggage, I stayed home scrubbing the pans from last night's dinner. She told me, "Your clothes still fit. Don't waste money on nonsense." So I used the cash I'd saved from repairing neighbors' old laptops to buy myself a plain swim trunk, the cheapest thing I could find. I wanted to feel like I belonged somewhere in that picture. A few nights before the trip, I walked past the cracked open door of the primary bedroom and heard Victor's voice. And the boy, I don't want any complications on this trip. My mother answered quickly, almost rehearsed, I've handled it. He won't be a problem. He's old enough to take care of himself. I froze outside the doorway, heart pounding. They weren't talking about luggage or seat assignments. They were talking about me like I was furniture being stored for the season. Still, I told myself there had to be a misunderstanding. Kids cling to hope even when they shouldn't. The morning we left for the airport, Denver was still dark. The Hale family rolled their brand new suitcases across the polished floor like a parade. I dragged my old scuffed one behind them. At check-in, Victor handed the agent 5 passports, not 6. I stared at the stack, waiting for mine to appear. It never did. When I asked about my boarding pass, the agent frowned at her screen. I only see 5 passengers on this reservation. Victor murmured to my mother, "Talk to him." She pulled me aside into the shadowed corner near a newsstand, her eyes darting around like she hoped no one would hear what she was about to say. "Orion, there's been a change. You're not coming." The words didn't make sense. "Why? What did I do?" She sighed, annoyed rather than apologetic. "Victor wants time with his kids. I need this trip to go well. You're 15, you don't need me breathing down your neck anymore." I told her I didn't have a house key. I didn't know how I would even get back to Santa Fe. She opened her wallet, pulled out $150 and shoved it into my palm like she was paying a bill she'd forgotten. "Figure it out. You're smart, my son, remember?" It was meant as reassurance, but it hit like an insult. She called my forced self-reliance proof that abandoning me was reasonable. I begged her to at least let me stay at a hotel for a night to leave after they boarded anything that didn't feel like being thrown away. She shook her head, lowering her voice as if her real concern was being overheard. "Don't make Victor uncomfortable." I told him everything was fine. Then she said the sentence that would echo in my head for years. "I can't let my future fall apart because you're still clinging to me." She kissed my forehead without really touching me, turned away and walked toward security with her new family. She didn't look back. Aurelia did long enough to smirk, confirming what I'd sensed all along. I was never meant to be part of this picture. I stood in the middle of Terminal C as their flight status changed from boarding to departed. I tried calling her, straight to voicemail. I texted. Nothing. I sat in a worn chair near the food court buying the cheapest soda I could to avoid being chased away. I watched families reunite, partners embrace, parents lift their children. I felt invisible. Eventually, I found myself in a restroom staring at my reflection under harsh, fluorescent lights. My eyes were red, my hands shaking around the crumpled bills she'd given me. It hit me then she hadn't left me at the airport. She had left me long before this was just the moment she stopped pretending otherwise. And from that nothing left to lose place, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name she'd spent years telling me to forget, Lysander Vale. I put my finger on call, and for the first time in years, I disobeyed her. I stared at the screen thumb hovering over the call button. My father's name looked foreign, like a word from a language I used to speak but could no longer remember. My hand trembled as I pressed it. The ringing felt endless, each tone a reminder of the fear that he might not answer, might not care, might not even remember me. Maybe everything my mother said about him had been true. Then he picked up immediately. "Orion." His voice cracked just slightly, and the sound of it hit me so hard I had to grip the counter to steady myself. I barely managed to whisper, "Yeah, it's me." When I told him I was at the airport alone, he didn't ask why my mother wasn't with me. He didn't ask what I'd done wrong. The first words out of his mouth were, "Are you safe? What gate are you near? Is anyone with you?" It was like someone lit a match inside a room I didn't realize was dark until then. When I gave him the details, he said, "Stay where you are. I'm coming." I told him he was in Seattle. He said simply, "I have a way." Within minutes, an airline employee approached me. "Your father asked us to look after you," she said. guiding me to a small private waiting room with bottled water, snacks, and a blanket. I didn't realize how cold I'd been until I felt warmth. I didn't know how long I'd been holding my breath until I finally let it out. But waiting was its own kind of torture. 3 hours stretched like 3 days. I kept telling myself I'd imagined the concern in his voice, that he'd realize this wasn't worth it. Every family passing by made the abandonment feel fresh, raw. I kept expecting the door to open and discover it was all a mistake. But around midnight, an agent knocked and said, "Follow me, please." She led me through a series of hallways past service doors and restricted zones, my heart pounding harder with every step. When she opened the final door, cold night air rushed in, and a private jet sat on the tarmac, engines cooling. A tall man stepped down the stairs, pausing when he saw me. Even from a distance, I knew that walk. I knew those shoulders. And when he whispered Orion, I felt something I'd buried years ago break loose inside me. He didn't rush me. He didn't demand anything. He just asked quietly, "Can I hug you?" I nodded, and he held me like he'd been waiting 15 years to do it again. On the plane, he opened a briefcase full of things I never knew existed: letters he'd written, cards, returned unopened records of calls he'd made, proof of child support payments my mother had sworn never came. Evidence of a man who had tried year after year to stay in my life. As the jet cut through the night sky over Colorado, I stared out the window and realized the most painful part wasn't that my mother left me at the airport. It was knowing she had already cut me out of her life long before she walked away. The truth wasn't new, it had just finally been exposed. The jet leveled out above the clouds, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. My father sat across from me, shoulders tight, as if afraid one wrong move would send me running. Then he opened his laptop, a soft metallic click that felt like the beginning of something irreversible. He showed me the life he'd been living since the divorce: a growing tech company, long workdays, no remarriage, no new family. "I kept a room for you," he said quietly. "Every house I bought, every move I made sure there was always space for you." Those words cracked something in me. For years I'd pictured him building a new life, leaving me behind. But the evidence on his screen told a different story. He clicked through folder after folder labeled with my name. Inside were scans of letters, birthday cards, New Year wishes, long messages about school life, and how much he missed me. Some were stamped, "Returned to sender." Others bore receipts that proved they'd been delivered. A few even carried signatures showing they'd been accepted at the house where I lived with my mother. I stared at the screen, my stomach turning as realization settled. She had kept every letter from me. She had stolen the chance for me to know I was loved. He showed me court filings next, requests to expand visitation, attempts to access my school records, emails to mediators and attorneys. He told me my mother had threatened to file harassment charges when he tried too hard to stay involved. I listened in silence, unable to reconcile the man in front of me with the villain drawn in my mother's stories. Then he opened another file: child support records. Every month, sometimes more than required, he had sent money. Not late, not missing, not skipped. And every payment had been accepted. "She told me you didn't send anything," I whispered. He shook his head. "I never missed a month." The spending logs told the rest: spa packages, resort bookings, designer handbags, dinners with Victor. All of it funded by the money meant for my food, my school supplies, my clothes. My chest felt tight, as if every breath hurt on the way out. When we landed in Seattle, exhaustion hit me like a wave. But stepping into my father's house, the quiet modern home overlooking Elliott Bay, felt like stepping into someone else's life. He led me upstairs to a room painted soft blue. A full bookshelf, a sturdy desk, a big bed, clean sheets, a telescope by the window. "I updated it every year," he said. "Didn't know your style anymore, so I kept it simple." On the desk sat a large box, wrapped in silver paper. Inside were 15 gifts, one for each birthday I'd missed with him. Comics, science kits, model airplanes, a hoodie in my size from every year. He had guessed what I would like, and even when he guessed wrong, the effort felt painfully right. I had to look away before the tears made everything blur. Then he told me something I didn't expect. For years, my mother had sent him pictures of me smiling at school, holding trophies, playing sports. He had kept them all believing I was thriving. But a few years ago, one of his employees taught him how to check digital metadata. The photos were fake. Some lifted from stock photography, others from unrelated social media accounts. "I thought you didn't want to talk to me," he said. "I didn't realize she wasn't letting you." It felt like watching my entire childhood collapse into dust. Every story twisted, every memory poisoned. My father closed the laptop gently. "You don't have to see her again," he said. "You're safe now." But I shook my head. "I need to go back. I need to get my things. And I need her to know I know." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Then we'll go together." His lawyer, Rebecca, met us at the house. She explained everything we needed to collect, every document that would matter, every violation my mother had committed. As the jet descended into New Mexico the next morning, fear crawled back into my chest. I was going to confront the woman who raised me, lied to me, and left me. I didn't know what I would say. I didn't know how much it would hurt. I only knew the truth had already begun to move, and I couldn't stop it, couldn't hide from it anymore. I stepped off the plane and whispered to myself, "Whatever happens next, I won't run." Returning to Santa Fe felt like walking into a life I no longer recognized. The Hale Mansion looked exactly the same, sleek glass walls, manicured desert plants, the quiet hum of wealth, but to me it felt hollow, like a stage set waiting for actors who'd gone home. My father and Rebecca walked beside me as I unlocked the side door. Inside, the air was cold and still. My small room sat at the far end of the hallway, untouched since the day I'd been dragged to the airport. When I stepped inside, it was like entering a storage unit, not a bedroom. Narrow bed, thin blanket, one crooked shelf. No signs of affection, no trace of me being anything more than the extra cargo Aurelia had called me. As I began sorting through my things, I opened the desk drawer and found a small tin box shoved all the way to the back. My breath caught when I lifted the lid. Inside were photos, me at 2, at 5, at 7, laughing on my father's shoulders at a fireworks festival, holding his hand outside a comic shop. Photos my mother had sworn never existed because he never showed up. The edges were bent, some torn, as if someone had tried to erase him from the frame. Rebecca checked the closet next. At the very bottom, buried under sweaters I hadn't worn in years, she pulled out a cardboard box. When she opened it, dozens of envelopes spilled out, letters, postcards, small packages, all addressed to me, all unopened. I sank onto the bed as she placed them in my lap. My father stood in the doorway, jaw tight, trying not to show how much it hurt him to see proof of how thoroughly he'd been shut out. In my mother's office, we found an entire folder labeled Vale Documentation. Inside were email exchanges with lawyers in which she claimed I experienced severe stress whenever my father tried to contact me. She insisted he was dangerous to my stability, even though I'd never seen him once after the divorce. She'd requested restrictions, blocked calls, changed numbers, instructed my school not to release information. There were handwritten notes reminding herself to update passwords, remove my father's details from emergency contacts, cut every link that might let him reach me. And then came the bank statements. Page after page of child support deposits, steady, punctual, never missed, followed by withdrawals for spa days, designer shopping, luxury dinners. All this time she had told me we were broke, that my father was worthless, that he didn't care. I felt anger rush up so abruptly I had to grip the edge of the desk to stay steady. I returned to my room and sat at the small desk, pulling out a sheet of paper. I didn't write accusations or insults. I wrote the truth. I wrote that I knew everything now. The letters, the lies, the money, the manipulation. I wrote that I wasn't leaving out of revenge. I was leaving because there was nothing here for me anymore. Nothing real. I placed the letter on the bed next to my house key, and the legal notice Rebecca said my mother was obligated to receive. Then I packed the only things that belonged to me, a few clothes, the old books my father had given me when I was little, and the box of letters she had stolen from my life. When I stepped out into the hallway, my father rested a hand on my shoulder but said nothing. He didn't need to. I walked out of that room without looking back. I knew if I did, some part of me would beg to stay, not because I belonged there, but because I had spent too long trying to. We left the mansion behind silent as we drove toward the airport. I knew my mother would return from her perfect vacation soon. She would open the door expecting her new life to still be intact, only to find the empty room, the letter, and the consequences waiting. And the next time we faced each other, it wouldn't be as mother and child. It would be as two people standing on opposite sides of a truth finally too large to hide. I was in Seattle finishing paperwork for my transfer into school when the alert came through the home security app. Unrecognized visitor at the gate. Then another message from a neighbor back in Santa Fe. The Hale house is in chaos. Your mother came back early. I froze. She wasn't supposed to return for 2 more days. But a missed connecting flight had sent her home sooner, dragging her suitcases through the quiet hallways of the mansion she'd fought so hard to belong to. When she opened the door to my room, she found it stripped bare, the small closet empty, the bed without sheets. My letter resting in the center of the mattress, and the legal envelope from Rebecca placed neatly beside it. I heard from the neighbor that she shouted my name, ran room to room, then started calling me over and over. Dozens of missed calls, long frantic voicemails, accusations mixed with sobbing, and then eventually silence. By late afternoon, my father's intercom buzzed. "There's a Maribel Ross asking for you," the guard said. Her voice came through next shaky, desperate, then angry, then pleading. She pressed the button repeatedly, like she could force her way into my life the same way she'd forced me out of hers. My father looked at me. "Do you want to see her?" My chest tightened, but I nodded. "Yes. But this time, I'm not talking alone." We set up in the living room. My father sat beside me but gave me enough space to breathe. Rebecca was there, calm and prepared, and a representative from Child Protective Services observed quietly from the corner. My pulse thudded in my ears as the door opened. My mother rushed toward me, arms outstretched. I stepped back. "Sit down," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. She blinked, wounded. "You left home," she snapped. "You embarrassed me. After everything I've done, you let people fill your head with lies." Tears welled in her eyes. "The Maldives, the whole trip was a misunderstanding. I thought you knew the plan. I thought you were fine." She looked at my father like he was poison. "He abandoned you. He just wants to buy you back now that he's rich." I didn't raise my voice. I just reached for the box beside me and pulled out the first stack of letters. "These," I said, placing them on the table, "are the birthdays you said he forgot." I slid out another stack. Christmas, New Year, school invitations, all unopened, all buried in her drawer. She stammered, "I was going to give them to you. I was waiting for the right time." I cut her off gently. "They were at the bottom of your closet, still sealed." Rebecca opened her folder and handed over the child support statements. "Mrs. Ross, she said you received financial support every month, more than required. You redirected those funds for personal expenses. That qualifies as misappropriation of support for a minor." My mother's face paled. She tried to recover. "I used that money to build a life for him." I met her eyes. "But that life never included me." Rebecca then produced the printed emails my mother had sent years ago, restricting school contact, requesting visitation limitations, insisting my father caused me stress even though I had not seen him since the divorce. I asked quietly, "Why did you write this? Why did you stop him from seeing me?" For the first time, she hesitated. Then she whispered, "Victor said it was better this way. Fewer complications." Before she could say more, the doorbell chimed. Security announced another visitor. Victor stepped into the living room, looking irritated, not worried. "I told you not to drag me into this," he said to her. "This is your mess, not mine." He didn't sit beside her. He didn't defend her. He didn't even touch her. She broke right in front of us, shoulders shaking. For the first time in my life, she was the one left standing alone. I took a slow breath. "I didn't leave you because I hated you," I said. "I left because you weren't a safe place for me anymore. You left me long before the airport. You pushed me out when you decided I didn't fit your new life." She sobbed harder, reaching for me again, but I didn't move. I'm not choosing sides, I continued. I just want to be the son of someone who actually wants a son. She crumpled onto the couch, tears running down her face, whispering apologies mixed with excuses. I didn't scream. I didn't berate her. I just stood and thanked my father for giving me the space to speak my truth. Then I walked out onto the balcony, inhaling the cool Seattle air. For the first time since I was 9 years old, I felt the weight of 2 lives fall away, and I finally stepped into one that was entirely my own. After the confrontation, everything moved quickly. Rebecca filed the petition's change of custody investigation of abandonment and misuse of child support. Saying my mother's name in a legal document felt surreal, like breaking a bond I'd spent most of my life trying desperately to maintain. I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Child Protective Services conducted their evaluation. They interviewed me, my father, the school counselors, and longtime neighbors. Their findings were careful but clear. The emotional environment my mother created was unstable, inconsistent, and harmful. One caseworker said something that stayed with me. Sometimes harm comes from absence, not action. My mother hired her own attorney, insisting she was misunderstood. But when Victor was called to testify, everything unraveled further. He told the court the Maldives trip was meant for him, her, and his children to bond without extra tension. He said she told him I was old enough to take care of myself. Hearing it spoken aloud in a courtroom made the truth sting all over again. The court then revealed something none of us expected, an old email from my mother to her lawyer years earlier. I don't want my son interfering with my future with Victor. Reading that line felt like being dropped from a height, a confirmation of something I'd felt but never wanted to believe. In the end, the court granted my father full custody. My mother's visitation rights were limited to supervised visits and only if I agreed. Sitting in the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Losing a parent is painful, but realizing you never truly had them is another kind of ache entirely. Life in Seattle slowly became life again. My father enrolled me at Westbridge Academy. I had a real room therapy sessions, teachers who knew my name, and people who saw me not as an inconvenience, not as baggage, but as a person worth caring for. I learned to breathe without waiting for the ground beneath me to shift. I learned that love doesn't vanish when things get hard. It shows up even on tarmacs in the middle of the night. Months later, a letter arrived from my mother, not asking for forgiveness, not blaming anyone. She wrote, "I was so afraid of losing everything that I didn't notice I was losing you first." I cried reading it, not because I wanted to return, but because it was the closest thing to honesty she had ever given me. As I got older, I gravitated toward family psychology and child advocacy. I spent years studying the very systems that failed me, determined to make sure no child ever felt as invisible as I once did. And now, as an adult, I can say this without anger: I forgive her. Forgiveness is a door I open for myself, not an invitation for her to walk back in. When I think back to that night at Terminal C, I no longer see a boy being abandoned. I see a boy being found. My father showed up when no one else did. And that moment changed the trajectory of my entire life. I'm not the kid waiting at the gate anymore. I'm Orion Vale, and I know where I belong. There's a quiet moment that comes after surviving something heavy, a moment when you finally realize you're no longer defined by what happened to you, but by what you chose to become afterward. Standing on the other side of my own story, I've learned that healing isn't a straight line, and it isn't loud. Sometimes it's just choosing yourself again and again, even when the past tries to pull you back. If this story reached you in some way, I hope it reminded you that we're all carrying something and none of us should carry it alone. Before I go, I'd really love to know you're here with me. Drop a simple hi in the comments or tell me where you're listening from. I always appreciate seeing how far these stories travel, how many hearts they quietly land in. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about survival, resilience, and finding your own way, feel free to subscribe. It helps this small corner grow into a place where people like us don't feel so alone. Thank you for staying with me.